The 12th warrior came out of the moonyard on a plank, and the crowd made the sound a crowd makes when it has stopped hoping. He had gone in an alpha of the northern packs, thick through the shoulders and sure of himself. He came out with one arm bound to his chest and his eyes fixed on nothing. None of the 12 had died. The Grey Sovereign did not kill them, it refused them, and a wolf, that old and that vast, could refuse a man in ways that left him carried. Runa stood where the scullery folk were made, to stand at the back, behind the pillars. In the cold draught off the north door, she could see almost nothing of the sunken enclosure and its chained wolf, and she preferred it so. What she could not help seeing, she could not help hearing, and the hearing was the danger. She counted the wolf's breaths, to keep her own steady the way her whole life had taught her. The sovereign's breathing came slow and enormous through the stone, and under it ran the thing only she could hear, grief, old and endless, pressing against the inside of her skull like a hand against a locked door. But the moon was the trouble. She could feel it climbing behind the high windows. This was a silver night, the first of the 3. And if the trial did not end soon, she would have to be gone before the light reached the sills. Whatever she became after dark, no one in Dunmaray could ever be allowed to see. On the dais of Blackstone, the young man who would be king was losing what little patience he owned. Prince Lysander of House Thane stood in cloth of grey and silver, beautiful and furious. Behind him, the Dowager Queen Ravella sat still as carved oak, watching the wolf the way a physician watches a wound that will not close. Again, Lysander said, "Bring another. There must be another." "There is no other, Your Grace." Elder Bede, the grey-robed keeper of the right, lifted his head. 12 were named. 12 have tried. The sovereign has refused them all. Under the low sound that moved through the hall, Runa heard the fear. Every soul knew the law. A king of Dunmaray was only a king if the Grey Sovereign owned him. The old king was a year dead, and the wolf had howled once at his passing and gone silent since. And a crown the sovereign would not bless was a crown any bold lord might reach for. Then the sovereign came up off its haunches without warning, and hit the end of its chains hard enough to ring the iron rings in the wall. The front rows broke, like water, and Runa, near the edge and not quick enough, was driven against the rail, and the cold of the drop opened beneath her. A hand closed on her arm. Another spread flat between her shoulders and held her whole weight against the fall, as though she weighed nothing. "Careful," a low voice, rough from long disuse. "It is grief, not hunger, but grief with teeth is still teeth. Stay back." She looked up into a plain keeper's coat and a face made unhandsome by a long pale scar from temple to beard. The eyes above it, the flat, soft gray of a winter morning. She knew him, though almost no one spoke to him. Soren, the last of the moonkeepers who tended the sovereign and had no wolf of his own. Son of a house fallen into disgrace a generation ago that no one named aloud. Wolfless, they called him, to his face, the word they used for her too, only they whispered hers behind her back. "Thank you," she managed. He had already let go and stepped back into the shadow as though being seen at her side might cost her something. Elder Bede lifted his staff, and the iron rang once on the stone. "The trial is ended. The sovereign has chosen no one. Let it be recorded that on this night the crown of Dunmaray stood unclaimed." And into the silence that came after, before the careful 19 years of her life could rise and stop her, Runa heard her own voice go out across the hall, small and clear as a dropped pin. "May I try?" Every soul in Wintergarth turned to look at the scullery girl at the back. Prince Lysander looked longest of all, and then, very softly, he began to laugh. The laughing was worse than shouting. Shouting could be answered. Laughter only asks the rest of the room to join, and the room was glad to. "Send it back to the pots," a lord called, and the hall laughed harder. "The sovereign has broken 12 alphas of the blood," and the sculleries answer with a mouse. Runa did not remember stepping out from the pillars. She only found that she was walking down the long aisle of staring faces, with her chin level and her hands folded so no one would see them shake. Every step carried her nearer the moon, nearer the wolf, nearer the end of the invisible life she had spent so long building. She walked anyway. Something in the grief pouring off the old wolf had taken hold of her and would not let her stand at the back and do nothing, and that frightened her more than the laughter did. Girl. Soren had moved along the shadow of the pillars to keep pace with her, his voice for her ears alone. Whatever you believe you can do, do not. It has put 12 warriors on their backs tonight. It will not gentle for a kitchen maid. I know, she said, and did not stop. Prince Lysander raised a hand and the laughter died. He was enjoying himself now. A ruined evening had been handed one small amusement at the end, and he meant to have all of it. By all means. Let the mouse try where lions failed. Perhaps when the beast is done with her, it will be in a kinder humor. Runa reached the black rail. Below her, chained in the pit of raked gray sand, the gray sovereign turned its enormous head and looked up at her, and the whole hall drew one breath and held it, waiting for the lunge. The lunge did not come. She did not use the listening. She had promised herself she would keep the deepest door of herself bolted even now. She only looked down at the old wolf and let it look back, and she said under her breath, in the plain voice a person uses on a frightened horse in a storm, the smallest true thing she owned. I know, I miss him too. And I never even got to know him. The sovereign's ears went flat. A long tremor ran its gray length. And then, slowly, with a groan of ancient joints and a sigh that stirred the sand, the wolf that had refused 12 alpha warriors of the blood lowered its great head to the ground and went still. The silence was total. Even the dowager queen had risen halfway from her chair. Elder Bede came to the rail on shaking legs, looked down at the quiet wolf, then at the girl, and his face went the color of tallow. It bows, he whispered. In 60 years of tending this rite, never once. He gathered himself and turned to the hall, lifting his voice until it filled the stone. Hear the law as it was set down in the first snows. The one to whom the sovereign bows is bound to the crown of Dunmurray Wolf consort, wed into the royal house, that the line and the sovereign be one. So it has always been, so it must be now. The color that had left Bede's face had gone straight into the prince's. Wed, Lysander said, you cannot mean it. The law does not bend, your grace. Look at her. His voice climbed. A scullion, a wolfless drab who smells of grease and cold ash. You would set that beside me, before every lord already sharpening his teeth for my father's crown. I would be laughed off the black stone. He drew himself up. No, I refuse. Let the beast bow to whom it pleases. I will not wed it. Runa heard the words, and beneath the shame of them felt absurdly a thin, cold thread of relief, and despised herself for it. Then the crown stays unclaimed, said Bede heavily, and every lord from the marches to the sea will take it as leave to reach for it. Refuse the sovereign's own choice, and you may keep your pride, and lose the kingdom before the snows. Lysander had no answer, and a proud prince with no answer is a dangerous thing to stand near. He looked, as such men do, to his mother. The dowager queen Ravella came down from the dais at last. She crossed the sand-strewn floor without hurry, and stopped before Runa, and studied her as she had studied the wolf, as a wound that would not close. Her eyes were pale and very clever and wholly without warmth. What is your name, child? Runa, your majesty, of the sculleries. I have no other name. No other name, Ravella repeated softly, as if the words themselves interested her. And no wolf. And yet, the oldest and proudest creature in this kingdom lays its head at your feet. She smiled, and the smile went nowhere near her eyes. How very curious you are. She turned to the lean man at her shoulder, in the gray and silver of the queen's guard, and did not trouble to lower her voice by much, because a queen need not. Take note of the girl, where she sleeps, to whom she speaks, where she goes when she thinks herself unwatched. The pale eyes slid back for one heartbeat. And I want to know where she is the moment the moon clears the sill, especially then. The blood turned to ice in Runa's veins. High above, through the tall windows, the first true silver of the silver night touched the top of the glass and began, very slowly, to come down. It was Soren who broke the deadlock, and he did it in the last way anyone expected. Quietly. He came out of the shadow of the pillars into the torchlight, and the hall, which had forgotten him, remembered him at once, and did not care for the remembering. The wolfless keeper, the son of the disgraced house. He walked to the black rail and laid one scarred hand on it, close to the sleeping wolf, and the sovereign did not stir at his nearness, which no one but Runa seemed to find strange. There is a second clause, Soren said. He did not raise his voice, and so the hall went silent to hear him, which she would come to understand was the only trick he owned, and the only one he had ever needed. Elder Bede will confirm it. When the royal house will not take the sovereign's chosen to wife, the duty falls to the keeper of the sovereign to stand as consort of record and guardian, so the wolf and the crown are not put asunder. The law is satisfied. The prince keeps his hands clean, and the realm keeps its peace. Bede confirmed it in a murmur, and Runa watched the prince understand he had been handed a door out of the room. Lysander's disgust rearranged itself into something like graciousness. The keeper may have her, and welcome. Let the wolfless wed the wolfless. They are well matched. He was already turning to his mother's arm, the amusement spent. See it done tonight, Bede, before the lords ride home with the tale. I will not have it, said the sovereign's choice went, a knight unhonored. And so it was done that night, and Runa, who had spent 19 years making herself too grey to be seen, was married before the most powerful people in Dunmurray, with the sand of the moonyard still on the chapel floor. There was no cathedral, no feast, no 3 days of bells. 9 witnesses stood in a side chapel of plain grey stone. Bede, the prince, his mother, 4 lords who stayed from suspicion rather than goodwill. Old Tamsin from the kitchens, apron still on, eyes streaming, and the sovereign's own great shadow filling the doorway, because it would not be parted from the girl now, and no one dared insist that it must. Tamsin caught Runa's cold hand between both of hers as the rite was made ready, and held it too hard, and wept more than any wedding warranted. I never thought I would live to see you stand up there, she whispered. Not you, child. Not after everything. And before Runa could ask what everything meant, Bede had begun, and the moment was gone. Soren said his words in that low, worn voice, and he meant them. She could hear that he meant them, which was somehow the hardest part of the night. She said hers, and could not feel her own lips move. By the time the last word was spoken, the moon had cleared the sill and lay in long silver bars across the chapel floor, and Runa's skin had begun to crawl with the old warning she knew better than her name. Not here. Not now. Not before these of all people. She needed a bolted door, and she needed it in minutes. Forgive me, she said, to no one and everyone, and did the one thing a new-made wife. She turned and walked out of her own wedding, quickly, then more quickly, gathering her plain skirts in both fists, the great grey wolf rising to pad after her, and left Soren alone at the altar stone, with the cold iron ring in his hand. She did not see his face. She could not afford to. She reached the small stone room high in the north tower they had given her, eased the wolf back into the corridor, with a hand in its enormous ruff, and a silent, aching apology it seemed to understand, and shut the door, and shot the bolt, and set her back to the wood just as the change took her. It came, as it always came under a full silver moon, swift and complete and terrible. Her bones did not break. They remembered. In one held breath, the plain scullery girl was gone, and in her place, filling the little room, stood a wolf, white as the first snow of the year, white as no wolf seen in living memory in Dunmurray. White as the very thing the criers named from the keep steps a curse, an omen, the certain sign of a kingdom soon to fall. She stood in the dark, and shook, and waited for her heart to slow. This was the secret 19 careful years had been built to keep, not merely that she had a wolf, that she had this one. Then from the far side of the bolted door, a voice, Soren's, low and careful and close to the wood. "My lady, are you unwell?" She could not answer him. A wolf has no words, for a man through a door. But in this form, under this moon, the door she had kept bolted her whole life stood open, and the listening poured through it, and did not stop at his voice. It went under his voice, the way it always went under, to the place where a wolf's heart ought to be. In every man of Dunmurray there lived a wolf, loud or quiet, near or far. In Soren the keeper, whom the kingdom named wolfless to his face, there ought to have been nothing. There ought to have been the empty grey silence she had heard once or twice in the truly wolfless, the rare and pitied few born without. Instead, she heard a wolf, faint, buried so far down it was very nearly not there, chained in a dark, deeper than the sovereign had ever been chained, and grieving, and alive. The grey-eyed man, on the other side of the door had a wolf, and it was weeping, quietly, endlessly, where for years no living soul had been able to hear it, where no one but her could hear it now. Runa the white wolf stood very still in the silver dark, her heart going like a struck drum, and stared at the bolted door as though she might see the grey-eyed man clean through it. "You have a wolf," she thought, in the wordless way of the changed. They told the whole world. You had none, and it is dying in there, alone, and no one has heard it weep in years. Morning came grey and ordinary, as though the world had not tilted in the night. Runa woke on the narrow cot beneath the window, a woman again, curled small in the last of the dark. She had not slept. She had lain staring at the bolted door, thinking of the thing she had heard through it. The buried wolf weeping in a man, the whole kingdom called empty, until the sky paled and her secret folded itself away for another month. Soren was not in the room. On the stool, by the cold hearth, someone had left a folded blanket, a jug of clean water, and a heel of bread with a whole apple beside it, unbruised. Not the leavings, a scullion scraped from other people's plates. She looked at it a long time before she understood it had been left for her, and that no one had ever done such a thing for her in her life. She was still looking at it when the door opened and he came in stooping under the low lintel. He stopped when he saw her awake, and for a moment neither knew what to say to the stranger. They had married. "You left," he said at last. Not an accusation, a plain fact set down between them, the way he set down everything. "I know. I am sorry. I was afraid." It was the truth, filed down until it was safe to hand over. Something moved behind his grey eyes. Of me, she let him believe it because it was easier than the rest, and because it was not entirely a lie. "I did not know what was expected." "Nothing is expected." He said it flatly, meaning it as a mercy, though it came out like a door closing. "This is a marriage of law, not of want. You owe me nothing. You have your own room and your own bolt, and I will never stand on the wrong side of it. On my honor, such as the world has left me." She had braced for cruelty, the way you brace for a blow you have taken 100 times, and it did not fall, and the bracing had nowhere to go. Her eyes stung, and she looked hard at the apple, so he would not see. "Thank you," she said, for the second time in as many days, and meant it twice as much. The keep did not know what to do with her, so it sneered. She was a consort now, which meant the great ladies could not send her back to the pots, and hated that they could not, so they found smaller ways, a shoulder turned. A conversation that stopped when she entered and began again, lower when she left. Wolfless drab in silk, she heard once, not quite behind her back. It was almost a comfort, being cold in the old familiar way. only two souls in Wintergarth looked at her as though she were real. One was old Tamsin, who came up each morning from the kitchens on some errand no one had asked for, and fussed, and once pressed a dried sprig of something bitter and white into her palm, and would not say what it was for, only that her mother would have wanted her to have it. Runa had never known she had a mother to want anything. She kept the sprig beneath her pillow and did not ask, because Tamsin's face, when she said the word mother, frightened her more than Ravella's ever had. The other was the wolf. Each night, Soren went down to the moonyard to sit with the Grey Sovereign, and on the third night, he asked in his plain way whether she would come. She should have said no. Every hour near the old wolf under a climbing moon was an hour nearer ruin. She said yes. The moonyard, by dark, was a different country. The crowds gone, the torches banked to embers, the great wolf lying unchained in the cold sand, because Soren would not chain it when no lords watched, and it let him. They sat on opposite sides of it, the vast, slow bulk between them, like a grey hill, breathing in the dark, and he talked to it, low and even, and the sovereign's grief eased under his voice by a fraction and rose again when he stopped. She kept to the far side, in the deep shadow the moon could not reach, where he could never see what the light might do to her face. With the wolf between them, it was almost safe to speak. "It misses him," she said softly. "The old king." His hand stilled in the grey fur. How would a scullion know what it misses? Anyone can see it. That was the safe answer. The true one she folded away. "It grieves, like something that does not understand why the world went quiet. Like a bell that has forgotten it is allowed to ring." "That is not how a kitchen maid talks," he said. But there was no edge in it now, only a careful wonder, and beneath his voice, faint and far down, she heard the caged thing in him turn in its sleep, as though her words had reached a place his own could not. They fell into it after that, night after night, the wolf between them and something thawing in the narrow band of sand where their two silences met. He had kept the sovereign since he was 16, he told her, and it had not spoken to him since the king died, and he had begun to believe it never would again. He did not say why a keeper of his blood had no wolf of his own, and she did not ask, though the caged thing wept the answer whenever the subject came near. She almost forgot to be afraid. That was the danger. On the night the second silver moon began to climb, she was still in the sand, her hand a finger's breadth from his in the grey fur, when the old crawl started under her skin, sudden and early, and panic came up her throat. She got to her feet too fast. "I have to go. Runa." He had never used her name before. It stopped her for half a heartbeat at the gate, half a heartbeat too long. As the moon cleared the wall, and a bar of pure silver fell across the sand, and she felt her own eyes catch it and shine, the way no woman's eyes shine, and she saw him see it. She fled before he could speak, but she had seen his face in that instant of silver, and she knew, with a cold, plunging certainty, that he had seen something, too. Soren did not come to her door that night, nor the next. She lay awake behind her bolts and waited for the knock, the torch, the guards, and none of it came, and the not coming was its own slow torture. He had seen the silver catch in her eyes. She was sure of it. Yet, when they passed in the cold corridors of Wintergarth, he only inclined his head, grave and unreadable, and said nothing, and she could not tell whether his silence was mercy or a trap still closing. The Dowager Queen made her move on the morning the frost first held past noon. The court was summoned to the great hall, and Ravella rose in grey and silver among the banked lords, and spoke in that clear, cold voice that never needed to climb, of the peril the kingdom stood in, a crown still unconfirmed, a sovereign that had bowed, yes, but bowed to what? A nameless scullion, with no wolf, and no blood, and no proof of either worth or right. The old wolf was grief-mad, she said gently, reasonably, and grief could mistake a kitchen maid for a queen as easily as a drowning man mistakes a reed for a rope. There must be proof. Ravella said, and the lords leaned toward her like grass toward the wind. The old law knew this. The bowing is only the first gate. On the third silver night, the last of them, the one the sovereign chose must stand in the moonyard and prove the choosing true, before this whole court, in the only tongue the sovereign speaks. She let the silence stretch. She must show her wolf. The hall stirred. Runa stood very still at the side, where consorts of no importance were made to stand, and felt the floor go out from under her, as surely as it had on the night of the rail. She must show her wolf. The one thing that would prove the sovereign right, the one thing that would see her burned, because there was a second half to the trap, and Ravella laid it down as sweetly as the first. And should anything false show itself, she said, her pale gaze drifting once across the room and over Runa like a cold hand. Anything cursed, anything the old tales warn us against, this court will know its duty. We have not forgotten what a white pelt means. A white wolf is not a wonder, whatever the soft-hearted may wish. It is the omen the histories bury in salt. It is the sign under which this kingdom last near fell. Show us a true wolf, and be crowned. Show us that other thing, and be put down like the ill luck it is. She smiled, and sat, and it was done. And Runa understood that the Dowager Queen had built her a room with 2 doors and a fire behind each. Fail to shift, and be named a fraud, and cast down. Shift and be named a curse. There was no third door. There had never been meant to be. The lords did not wait for the third night to begin the punishing. As the court broke apart, a young lord of the Queen's circle, wine-bright and, eager to be seen, stepped into Runa's path with a mummer's bow. "Your Grace," he said, loud enough for the hall, "or is it your scullion? I forget which we are pretending. Tell me, when you take your true shape in the yard, will you fetch the bones after, or only gnaw them?" The laughter began at once, and Runa fixed her eyes on the middle distance and waited for it to pass over her, the way she had waited out 100 such tides. It did not get the chance. Soren was simply there, between her and the young lord, having crossed the floor without seeming to hurry, and he did not raise his hand or his voice. He only looked at the man and said, quietly, so the hall was made to hush. To catch it, the sovereign has broken 12 alphas this season for putting themselves before it. You are welcome to be the 13th. Shall I open the gate for you tonight, my lord? And we will all learn together what shape you take when it is finished with you. The young lord's grin curdled. He found somewhere else to be. And Runa, who had defended herself her whole life by being too small to strike at, did not know where to put the strange hot ache of having been stood in front of. That night she went down to the moonyard, because she did not know where else to put herself, and because the wolf's grief was the only grief in the keep that made sense beside her own. Soren was already there. He did not ask why her hands shook. He said without looking at her, in the flat voice that made rooms go quiet, "She has said it so you cannot win. Yes, she is very good at that." He was quiet a moment. "My family learned it too, once." It was the nearest he had ever come to the thing he would not say. She waited, hardly breathing, and beneath his words the caged wolf stirred and pressed toward her through the dark, and this time, carefully, the way you lay a flat hand against a frightened animal, she let a little of herself reach back toward it. Not the listening thrown wide, only a touch, only a whisper into the deep of him. "I hear you. You are not alone in there." Soren's breath caught. His head came up. For one moment, his gray eyes found hers across the sleeping bulk of the sovereign, wide and startled, as though someone had spoken his name in an empty room. And she snatched herself back so fast it hurt. "What was that?" he said. Not a question. He had felt it. The wolf, no one could hear, had heard her, and so had he. She did not answer. She could not. She rose and left him with the question, and climbed to her room and bolted the door and pressed the bitter white sprig from beneath her pillow to her mouth to keep from weeping aloud 2 nights. 2 nights, until the third silver moon, and the moonyard, full of every lord in Dunmaray, and a choice with no right answer. And behind her all the way up the dark stair, she felt the Queen's lean guardsman watching her go, counting her steps, the way he had counted them every night since the wolf first bowed. For one day she let herself hope. And that was the mistake. Soren did not corner her with his question. That was the first kindness. The next morning he found her in the cold gallery where she had gone to be alone with her dread, and he did not speak of wolves or trials or the things she had done in the dark. He held out his hand, palm up, and in it lay a small carving, a wolf no longer than her thumb, worked in pale wood, worn smooth as a river stone. "My father made it," he said, "for me, when I was a boy, before." He did not say before what. "I have carried it ever since. I want you to have it, for the third night, so that whatever they make you do in that yard, you will have one thing in your hand that was given and not taken." She closed her fingers around the little wolf and could not speak. It was warm from his pocket. It was the kindest thing anyone had ever done for her, and it undid her more thoroughly than any cruelty ever had, and she understood in that moment, with a terror worse than the trial itself, that she had done the one thing her whole careful life had been built to prevent. She had come to love him, and loving him meant she could not let him stand beside her when the yard learned what she was, because the yard would burn whatever stood beside her too. She almost told him then. The truth climbed her throat, white and terrible. "I am the very thing your queen means to put down," and she swallowed it back, because a secret, 19 years deep, does not come out for the asking, and because she did not yet know whether he had chosen his father's name over her. And she would not hand him the knife before she knew which way he would turn it. It was Tamsin who nearly opened the door. She could not. The old woman came that afternoon and found her turning the carving over and over in her hands, and went very still, and her seamed face crumpled. "He gave you the little wolf," she whispered. "Ah, child! Do you not know whose hands carved that?" She reached out and closed Runa's fingers over it, exactly as she had closed them over the white sprig. "There is a thing I should have told you long ago. A thing about the night you first came to me. When this dreadful yard is behind us, you will sit with old Tamsin and hear all of it, and you will understand at last why I have wept at you since you were a babe in wool. But there was no when it is behind us, not with the third night 2 days off, and before Runa could seize her by both hands and demand it now, the old woman had gone frightened of her own mouth. That is the moment to draw a breath before the dark comes down, as it must. Let us pause here a moment. You and I, if these are the kind of stories you would not want to miss, take a breath and follow the channel before we go on. It costs you nothing, and it keeps the tales coming. She went, looking for Soren that evening. To give the carving back or to keep it, she was not sure which, only that she could not carry both the little wolf and the words she had not said. She followed the sound of his voice to the door of the Queen's antechamber, and there she stopped, because the other voice in the room was Ravella's, and what they were saying rooted her to the cold stone. The Queen was already speaking. "Every acre, restored the name your father lost, given back. The disgrace struck from the rolls as though it never was. Your house whole again, keeper, in a single stroke of my pen. You have wanted nothing else, your whole gray life, and all it asks of you is that you step aside from the girl, and let the third night take its course." Runa's blood roared in her ears. She pressed to the wall and made herself listen, though every part of her wanted to run. "And if I do," came Soren's voice, low and even and giving nothing, "she goes into that yard alone. She goes into that yard alone, regardless. You cannot shift for her. You cannot bleed for her. You are a wolfless man with a ruined name, and she is already lost, whether you cling to her or not. The only question is whether you are lost beside her or whether you are at last restored. A rustle of silk. Bank keeper. What is she to you? In truth, a stranger the beast chose by accident. A month of duty. Weigh that against everything your blood was stripped of, and give me your answer by the third night. And in the terrible pause that followed, Runa heard Soren say, quietly, I will think on it. She did not stay to hear more. She could not. The words she had were enough, and her mind, trained by a lifetime to expect exactly this, filled in all the rest. He would think on it. Of course he would. Everything he had lost, weighed against a month of duty and a stranger the beast had merely happened upon. She had heard the price of her, and she had heard him weigh it and not refuse. She climbed to her room with the little carved wolf still warm in her fist, and she did not weep, because weeping is a thing you do when you still expect better. She set the carving on the sill in the moonlight and looked at it a long while. Then she began, quietly, to plan how she would walk into the moonyard on the third silver night and free him from the choosing by making it herself. If she was already lost, then let her be lost in the one way that bought back the single thing he had ever wanted. Let her be the accident the beast chose, and nothing more, and let him keep his father's name. She did not know that she had heard only half of what passed in that room. She did not know that when the door had closed behind the queen, Soren had stood a long time in the dark, and then said, to no one, to the empty air, the other half of his answer. The half she had not stayed to hear. The third, silver night came down on Wintergarth, like a lid closing on a box. Runa spent the last of the daylight making herself ready in the only way that mattered, which was inside, because there is nothing to be done to the outside of a woman about to become something else in front of 1,000 eyes. She sat on the narrow cot and turned the little carved wolf over in her hands until the wood was warm, and made her plans smooth and hard and simple, the way you wear a stone smooth by carrying it a long way, she had decided. If the moonyard would take one of them and spare the other, then it would take her. Soren would walk out with his father's name restored, and his whole life ahead of him, and in a year he would think of the scullion the beast had chosen only the way a man thinks of a hard winter he survived. It was a clean plan. It asked one thing, and that one thing would cost her everything, that she never let him stand beside her, because a man who stood beside a cursed thing burned with it. And because a man offered his heart's desire did not reach for it while the woman at his side begged him to, she tucked the dried white sprig into her bodice over her heart, for whatever a dead woman's blessing was worth. Then she waited for the dark, and for him, because she knew he would come, and knew what she would have to do to him when he did. He came in the blue hour before the trial, a single quiet knock, and she was ready for him, and she was cruel. You will not come down with me, she said, before he could get a word past the door. She kept her back to him, and her voice flat as slate, because if she turned and saw his face, she would come apart. You are the keeper. Your place is with the sovereign, not with a woman the court is about to be finished with. Whatever happens in that yard, you will stand where you always stand, and you will not move, and you will not speak for me. A silence. The particular silence of a man deciding to be careful. Runa, turn around and look at me. No, something changed in you between the carving, and now, tell me what you heard. Her heart lurched. He was too quick. He had always been too quick seeing under the surface of a room the way she heard under the surface of a wolf. I heard nothing. I have come to my senses, which is more than either of us managed this past month. She found Ravella's voice and put it on like a cold glove. This was a marriage of law. You said the words yourself. Our first morning, I release you from it. Take what the queen offered, and be glad. I would, in your place. He went very still. So you were at the door. You heard her, and you did not stay for me. I heard enough. Her nails bit her palms. Take the deal, Soren. His name broke in her mouth, and she despised herself for it. There is nothing in this gray keep worth losing your father's name over. least of all a scullion the wolf pointed at by mistake. For a long while he made no answer at all, and she thought savagely, "Good, let him hate me. Hate is lighter to carry out of a burning house than love." Then he spoke, and his voice had folded shut flat and shuddered the way it had been that first cold morning, the voice of a man putting a thing away where it can never be reached again. "If that is what you wish, then I will not stand beside you. I will stand where you tell me, and I will not move, and I will not speak." A pause. "Is that everything you want from me?" "It is." And he was gone, the door soft behind him, and she stood at the window with the carved wolf biting into her fist until the last light bled from the sky and told herself she had won. They came for her at moonrise and walked her down through the cold keep to the moonyard as though she were already condemned, which, by their faces, she was. She carried nothing but the little wooden wolf closed in her hand, warm from her own grip and no longer from his. The moonyard was full to its stone lip. Every lord and lady in Dunmaray ringed the sunken pit under a hard, cloudless sky, and the third silver moon hung clear of the eastern wall, huge and white and merciless. Its light poured across the raked sand like spilled milk. At the near rails stood the Dowager Queen in silver, serene as an altar, Lysander lounging at her side, Elder Bede, with his staff and his old sorrow, and behind them, unchained, its grey head high, for the first time in a year the grey sovereign. And across the pit, in the keeper's place where she had ordered him to stand, stood Sorin, his face carved from the same grey stone as the walls, not looking at her, doing exactly what she had told him. It was the hardest thing she had ever had to look at. Good, she told herself, and the word was ash. Let him hate her. Let him live to do it 50 years. Elder Bede lifted his staff. The iron rang once. "The sovereign has bowed to this woman, and the law of the first snows demands its proof. Let her show this court her wolf, that we may know the bowing true and crown her, or know it false and be done." Then he lowered his voice. For her alone, and in it, past all belief, was pity. "Child, if you have hidden anything in all your life, hide it still. Show them any grey wolf under heaven, the smallest, the plainest, and you will walk out alive. Any grey wolf at all." But she had no grey wolf to show. She had only ever had the one. And the moon was on her now, climbing the bare skin of her arms like cold white fire, and there was no bolted door left anywhere to put between herself and their eyes. She opened her fist and looked one last time at the little carved wolf in her palm, the thing that was given and not taken, the only such thing she had ever owned. She closed her hand over it. She closed her eyes. And she let go of the secret she had carried every day of her life. The silver took her, in front of them all. Where the scullery girl had stood, a white wolf rose into the moonlight, and the whole moonyard forgot how to breathe. She was not large. That was the thing none of them had braced for. The 12 who failed had been great grey brutes, mountains of muscle, and she was slighter than the least of them, slender and long-limbed and fine, and she was white. White from her black nose to the tip of her tail, white as the moon that made her, white as snow with the low sun behind it, white as nothing any soul in that yard had seen walk on 4 legs and live. For one held heartbeat, the whole court stared, struck dumb, by a thing every one of them had been taught since the cradle to dread, and never believed they would see. Then a voice cracked the silence like ice underfoot. "White, it is white?" The omen, exactly as the histories said. And the hall came apart. Lords shoved back from the rail onto the feet of the lords behind them. Ladies cried out, and the old buried dread, fed to them with their mother's milk, came boiling up out of every throat at once, a curse, a sign. The fall of the kingdom set down in the sand before their eyes. And through it, from the near rail, the Dowager Queen's voice fell like a dropped blade, cold and clear, and very nearly glad, because this was the moment she had built the whole trap to reach. There, You see it now, exactly as I warned you. Cursed. False. A white thing come among us to unmake us. As one came once before and near ended us all. She did not raise her voice. She never had to. Guards, you know your duty. Put the thing down. At the rail, a guardsman lifted a crossbow already spanned, and the broad head of the quarrel caught the moonlight and threw it back with the dead gray shine that belonged to one substance only. Moon silver, the one thing under heaven that could kill what Runa had become. He set his cheek to the stock and sighted down the bolt at the white wolf, frozen in the sand. And Runa, trapped inside the wolf and its vast animal terror, her human mind drowned under it, could not make her forelegs move. The bolt loosed with a flat, hard crack. And Soren, who had stood carved from gray stone where her cruel mouth had ordered him, who had given his word, not 1 hour passed, that he would not move, moved. He came off the rail and across the sand faster than a wolfless man had any right to move, faster than thought. And when he reached her, he did not fling himself flat or throw up an arm. He put his whole body in the bolt's path, square between the flying silver and the white wolf. The plain, unhurried way a man steps in front of a child in a road. And the moon silver quarrel loosed, to find her heart found his instead, high in the back, and drove him down onto his knees, and then his face in the cold sand at her feet. For one breath, the world hung still around the fallen man. Then the gray sovereign came apart. It had watched the silver fly. It had watched its keeper fall, the boy who had tended it since he was 16. The last hand in all the world ever laid gentle on its gray head, struck down and bleeding in its own yard. And the grief that had driven it mad for a year turned between one instant and the next into a rage that went up through the stones like a struck bell. It rose to its full and terrible height, taller than any wolf had a right to stand, and turned its ancient burning eyes on the court that had loosed the silver. And every soul about that pit understood, in one freezing breath, that they were about to die. It lunged, for the rail, for the queen, for all of them, and Runa threw herself into its path. Not with her small white body, which the gray storm would have brushed aside like a leaf. With the thing she had starved and denied her whole life. She flung the listening open wider than she had ever dared, and poured herself into the old wolf's rage, into the drowning gray ocean of its grief. And she did not try to command it, because you cannot command a grief that sighs. She only met it. She let it feel that she felt it too, all of it. The boy bleeding in the sand, the year of silence, the old king a year dead. And that it was not alone and had not been alone since the first night she heard it weeping through the stone. I am here, she told it, in the tongue older than words. He is not gone, yet. Do not do this. Help me keep him. The sovereign stopped. It stopped with its jaws, a hand's breadth, from the frozen upturned face of the dowager queen, close enough to stir the silver at her throat. And then it swung its enormous head around, back to the small white wolf, standing over the fallen keeper. And it looked at her, and something passed in that look. Between the oldest creature in Dunmore and the youngest wolf in it, that the whole court saw and none of them understood. Then the gray sovereign turned its back on the queen it might have killed, and walked to the white wolf and the bleeding man, and lay down in the sand around them like a gray wall, and set its huge body between them and every crossbow in the yard, and drew back its lip from its teeth, and snarled at its own court. And so a reckoning was made in the moonyard that night, not with laws or words, but with teeth. No crossbow in Dunmore would loose while the sovereign stood guard, and no lord would be the one to give the order and watch the old grey death come over the rail for him. Ravella stood white and rigid, outweighted for the first time in her cold life. Lysander stared down at the white wolf as though he had never seen her, which in every way that counted he never had. And into the deadlock, old Bede lifted his staff in shaking hands and cried that the sovereign had answered, that no court could gainsay the wolf's judgment given in the wolf's own yard, and that the woman and her wounded man stood under its protection, and none would touch them save on pain of breaking the first law. It was thin cover, and every soul knew it, but it held long enough. They carried Soren up out of the moonyard on a plank the way they had carried the 12, except that Soren had not failed the trial, he had ended it. The moon's silver had gone deep, and by the time Runa had forced herself, shaking, back into her own skin, and crawled to his side, his legs had gone still and cold and would not answer him. But his gray eyes, when they found her face, held no blame at all, only a terrible quiet tenderness, and behind it 3 words she had ordered him, 2 hours before, never to say, "I chose you." Then his eyes fell closed, and he did not open them again that night, and she knelt over him in the trampled silver sand, and did not know for certain whether he ever would. How they came to the whitewood, Runa was never afterward able to piece together in full. There were only fragments, the way there are only fragments of a fever. The gray sovereign, a silent gray shape pacing at the tailboard the whole way. Old Tamsin, wrapped in every shawl she owned, a satchel on her knees, of whatever she had snatched from the kitchens in the dark. The jolt and rattle of the cart on the frozen road, and the white birch forest rising to close around them, pale and silent and endless, folding the black keep away tree by tree. And Soren, senseless in the straw, his hand in both of hers the whole cold way, and his hand as cold as the silver that had put him there. The whitewood had been the sanctuary of the moonkeepers once, before their long disgrace, and no living soul had made a home under its white trees in a generation. But the old timber lodge still stood among the birches at its heart, and its roof still held out the snow, and there on the floor, before its wide cold hearth, Runa made a bed and laid the wounded man down, and lit a fire with shaking hands, and began the longest fight of her life. For 3 days and nights he burned. The moon silver had been drawn from his flesh, but had left its poison in his blood, and it fought her the way a hard frost fights the spring, patient and total and cold, and she fought it back with everything Tamsin knew of roots and bitter leaf, and with everything she herself knew that no living person had taught her. Because in the deep of each night, when the fever climbed, and his breath went thin and even Tamsin turned her face away, Runa did the thing she could do for no one else alive. She opened the listening and went down into the dark of him, to the caged wolf that had wept there for 19 years, and she would not let it go out. She sat beside it in the black, and wrapped the whole of herself around the guttering thing, and told it, over and over, until the words wore smooth. "You are not alone in here. I have you. Stay. He needs you on the other side of this. Only stay." On the 4th night, the fever broke. On the 5th, his eyes opened and found her, clear at last, and he said her name the way a man sets down a heavy thing he has carried a long road. And she wept, finally, the whole month of it at once, kneeling on the hearthstones, with her face in his open hand. And when she could form words, she told him the thing that had sat in her chest like a swallowed stone. "I heard you. In the Queen's room, I heard her offer you your father's name and land, and heard you say you would think on it, and I ran. I thought you were weighing me against everything your house had lost. That is why I was cruel. That is why I made you stand across the pit like a stranger. I wanted you to hate me just enough to take her deal and live." His fingers moved weakly against her wet cheek. "You did not stay to hear the rest of my answer. No. I told her a name, bought with your life, would not be my father's name. It would be a stone I had tied round its neck and thrown in the river. I told her she could keep her acres and her pardon both." He drew a slow breath. "I had made my choice long before that night, Runa. I made it the hour the wolf bowed to a frightened scullion, and the whole bright court laughed. And I stood there, and thought, no, not this one. Not while I have breath and a place to stand." A ghost of his old dry humor moved across his ruined face. "I am a slow man, and a plain one, but I have never once weighed the people I love. I only ever kept them, the people I love." She held the words against her the way she held the little carved wolf, warm and given and never taken. They came into a strange, quiet grace. After that, the two of them, and the old woman, and the great gray wolf that would not be a room away from Runa at any hour. His legs would not wait. The silver had done that, and no leaf of Tamsin's could undo it, and he did not pretend otherwise, or let her pity him for it, which was its own hard courage. But his hands were strong, and his voice came back to its low, even self, and his caged wolf, night upon night, climbed nearer the surface under her patient listening, as though it had heard her calling through the fever and was climbing, hand over hand, toward the sound of her voice. There was a bright night, near the end of the second week, when she lay in her white wolf's shape on the floor beside his bed, her head on his chest, and she felt his caged wolf come all the way to the surface of him for the first time, and press back against her weak and wondering, like a hand laid over a hand through a pane of glass. Soren went very still beneath her. "I felt that," he said into the dark, his voice unsteady in a way she had never heard it. 19 years, and I had made myself forget it was ever there. And you reached in, and it answered. She could not tell him she had been reaching every night since the fever. She only pressed a little closer, and let the two of them, the white wolf waking and the gray one climbing, lie quiet together in the dark a while. And she came in those birch-white weeks to understand why the lodge had felt from the first like a held breath. The trees were white, every one of them, white-barked and slender, white as she was under the moon. And on the bright nights, when she walked among them, on 4 white feet, with the sovereign loping gray at her flank, she was for the first time in her life not a secret kept at the cost of everything, but simply a thing that belonged to the place it stood in. She had spent 19 years being wrong in every room she entered. Here, among the white trees, under the white moon, she was at last entirely right. It could not last. She knew that, the way you know a warm spell in deep winter will not hold, and she spent every hour she could contrive trying not to know it. She was walking back to the lodge at dawn, on the 10th morning a woman again, and wrapped in Soren's coat, against the bitter cold, when the sovereign stopped dead in the path ahead. It lifted its great head, pricked its ears toward the eastern road, and went utterly still. A moment later, she heard what it had heard. Hooves, a great many of them, coming up through the white trees, and with them the jingle of harness and the creak of fine leather. An escort, far too large for a message, and far too fine for an arrest. The crown had found the whitewood, and it was coming, she understood, with a sick lurch of her heart, not to take her away in irons. It was coming to fetch her home. They did not come with chains. That was the whole cunning of it, and Runa understood, the moment she saw them, that the cunning was not Lysander's. He came himself, at the head of a column bright as a feast day, pennants snapping, horses groomed to a shine, a train of servants and gift-laden mules winding into the white trees behind him. He drew rein in the frost-white clearing before the lodge, swung down and crossed the frozen ground to where she stood in the doorway in a dead man's coat, and swept her a bow so low that a month past he would sooner have died than make it to a girl who scrubbed his pots. When he straightened, his beautiful face wore something she had never seen it wear, contrition or a very good likeness of it. "Lady Runa," he said the name slowly. The way a man tastes a wine he realizes too late he was a fool to send back. "I have ridden 2 hard days to say 2 things, and the first is that I was wrong. I called you a drab and a fraud, and I was wrong. My mother called you a curse, and taught a kingdom the same, and she was wrong, and worse than wrong. We have all of us been schooled, since the cradle in a lie, so old, we mistook it for wisdom." He spread his gloved hands, rueful, without shame, but a lie cannot stand in front of a sovereign that has chosen. "And it chose you? Twice now, in blood, before the whole court. So I have come to unsay every word of it, and to ask you the thing I should have asked the first night, when I was too great a fool to see the crown at the back of my own hall." "And what thing is that?" Runa said. Though she knew, her voice came steadier than she felt. Marry me. He let it fall into the cold air and shine there. Hear what it means before you answer, for it means more than my hand. A white wolf is not the fall of Dunmoray. It is the founding of it, for the first sovereigns of this land were white, before their histories were burned and written over, to call them monsters. Do you understand? You are not the omen the kingdom feared. You are the thing it lost. You are the true blood come back to it, and I am offering to set you where that blood belongs, at the front of every hall, for the rest of your life. The clearing had gone very quiet. Somewhere behind her a log settled in the fire. Runa let him talk, and hated how the words reached past her guard, and found the girl who had stood at the back behind the pillars her whole life. The girl who ate standing up in the steam and grease. The girl who had never once, in 19 years, been wanted at the front of any room by anyone. Marry me, Lysander said again, softer, pressing where he felt the give. And every wrong done you is made right in the doing. Your name, struck from the rolls, written back in gold. Your line, that they hunted, raised up, and honored. My own mother made to answer, before the law. For every wrong her men did the argent line. If that is your price, and I think it is, and I would pay it gladly. Rule beside me, let the sovereign bless us both, and no soul in this kingdom will ever again dare call you one whit less than a queen. He smiled his lovely, practiced smile. You would be safe. You would be honored. You would be, after a lifetime among the ashes, exactly the thing you were born to be, and it was everything. That was the horror of it, standing there in the pale morning with her breath smoking. Every single thing that 19 years of being no one had denied her, held out in two open hands, and all she had to do to have it was reach out her own and close it. And Soren, she said. A flicker crossed his face, there, and smoothed away as quick as water closing. The keeper will be very well cared for, of course. A generous pension, an honored place. He saved the sacred consort of Dunmoray with his own body before the whole court, and no soul in the realm will be permitted to forget it. The gentleness that came into his voice then was the most terrible thing she had heard in all of it, worse than his mother's cold, because it was almost real. But you cannot believe, my lady, that a ruined keeper of a broken house, who will live out his days in a chair by a fire, is the life meant for the woman the sovereign came home to. You have wept in kitchens long enough. I am offering you the son, and if he is half the man they say, he will be the first to tell you to reach up and take it. And there, at the last, was the blade that went home, because it was true. Soren would be the first to tell her to take it. She knew it in her bones. The way she knew the pull of the moon and the knowing sat down cold and heavy in her chest, and gave no sign of getting up. For those 3 days, the offer sat in the clearing like a second sun, and she felt the pull of it every waking hour. She had only to say one word and the cold would be over, all of it. The pots and the pillars and the whispering and the fear. A whole life of being no one wiped clean in a single afternoon. She was ashamed of how badly a part of her wanted it. She had wanted to be wanted for so long that the wanting had worn a groove in her. And here at last was a prince, and a crown, and a whole kingdom pouring themselves into that groove, and it would have been so easy, and so warm, and so reasonable to let them fill it. She told the prince, in a voice she kept level by main force, that she would give him her answer in 3 days. He bowed again, gracious in his patience, as only a man certain of his ground can be, and made his bright camp in the frozen clearing, in no hurry, precisely as patient as his mother would have been. And Runa went back inside, to the fire, and to the man she loved lying beside it, and found she could not meet his gray eyes, because she already knew, to the word, what he was going to say. And she was right. He said it that same night, when Tamsin had taken herself off to her cot, in the back room, and the fire had burned to a low red heart and the gray sovereign lay stretched across the threshold, like a long gray drift of snow. "You have to take it," Soren said into the quiet. She had known it was coming since the prince's first perfect bow, and still the words went through her clean, the way the silver had gone through him. "Do not," she said. "Do not you dare." "Runa." He said her name in the gentle way, the way that took the strength out of her knees, the way she had no armor against. "Look at what the man is holding out to you. Look at it clearly, and stop looking at me. Your name cleared, written back in gold, your blood, that they hunted through the snow, lifted up and honored before them all. That old poison hauled out into the daylight and made to answer for itself. Safety, for the first time in your life, a kingdom that would go down on its knees to you, where all your life it has done nothing but spit." His voice was terribly steady, and she understood he had built the whole speech while she slept, plank by careful plank, the way he built everything, so it would come out level and impossible to argue against. "I have turned it over every hour since he rode into that clearing, and there is no argument against a single word of it. There is only me, on the other side of the scale, and I am not an argument, Runa. I am a man who cannot feel his own two legs, in another man's lodge, in the middle of a white wood, with a wolf that has been silent 19 years, and a name that put my own father in the ground. That is the whole of what I have to weigh against a crown." The old dry note was there, gone bitter all the way through. "It is not a close weighing. It would be a mercy to us both, if you would stop pretending it is." "You told me," she said, and her voice was shaking past all her holding of it now, "in this very room, with the fever barely gone out of you, that you have never once weighed the people you love. You said you only keep them." "I do not weigh them." He looked at her then, full on, and for the first time since the moonyard, something was breaking open behind the gray of his eyes. "That is the very reason I am able to do this. If I let myself weigh the two of us, here, in the firelight, I would keep you, because I am selfish enough, God knows, to want to keep you more than I have wanted anything in my life, but I love you. And a man who loves a woman does not chain her to a chair beside a dying fire at the back of the world and call the chaining devotion. He does not let her hand back a crown and a cleared name and the undoing of every wrong ever done to her for the privilege of pushing him from one cold room to another until they are both old." His jaw worked. "You were not born for this small dark life, Runa. You were born for the front of the hall, and the sun on your face, and every knee in the kingdom bent. Go back and take it. I am telling you, with the whole of what is left of me, to go." "That is not love." She was weeping now, and let herself, done, holding anything back. "That is you, deciding for me, one more time, that you are not enough. You have done it every day of your life. They said the word wolfless to you, and you believed them. They said the word fallen, and you believed them. And now, when it matters more than it ever has, you will say the word to yourself, not enough, and use it to hand me over to a man who called me a drab to my face a month ago. And you will do it so that you never have to stand still and risk finding out that I would choose you. That I would choose you over the sun, over the crown, over the front of every hall in the world." Her breath tore. "You do not get to protect me out of my own choosing. Not this. Never this one." For a long moment he said nothing. The fire cracked and threw up a little cloud of sparks. The sovereign lifted its great head from the threshold, looked slowly between the two of them and laid it down again. "Then choose," he said at last, low and rough. "I will not stop you, but choose me, knowing exactly what I am, Runa. Not what you wish. In the firelight, I could still become a ruined man, a silent house, a hard road, and a poor one, and a long way from any sun." He held her eyes across the low red light. "Choose that if you are going to choose it, with both eyes open." And she drew breath to answer him, to end the whole of it right there on the hearthstones once and for all. To tell him she had made her choice on the 5th night of his fever, with her face in his open hand, and had only been waiting for him to stop being a fool long enough to hear it. She drew the breath, and she never spoke a word of it, because in that instant the gray sovereign came up off the threshold with a snarl that shook the dust from the rafter's ears, flat, every hair along its spine on end, its whole ancient body pointed like a drawn arrow at the dark beyond the open door. And from the frozen clearing, from somewhere past Lysander's sleeping bright pavilions, came a small sound that had no business being there, a soft and careful and deliberate chime. The sound of moon silver shifted quietly in the cold, and Runa, flinging the listening wide open in a heartbeat of pure animal fear, felt them out there in the dark. 4 of them. Not the prince's honor guard, who slept. 4 lean, quiet men, spread wide through the white trees, moving without a word toward the lodge and the low red light of its fire. And in that moment, she understood the whole trap. The way you understand a thing a half-second too late to escape it. The Dowager Queen had never meant her son's proposal to need an answer. Ravella had sent the offer in by daylight, bright and generous and patient, for one reason only: to still the wood, keep the sovereign quiet, and hold Runa fixed in one place, believing herself courted until the dark came down. And then, into that same dark, she had sent these, so that whatever the white wolf of the Argent line chose, by the fire, in the end, she would not live to see the morning that would let her choose it twice. There was no time to wake Tamsin, no time to think, only the listening and the sovereign, and the white wolf Runa became between one breath and the next, bursting out through the lodge door into the frost, with the gray shape of the sovereign at her flank. The queen's silvered men were good, quiet, spread wide, come to kill a sleeping woman in her bed. They had not come to meet 2 wolves in the open dark, one, the oldest terror in Dunmoray, and the other lit white as a lantern by the moon. And they had not come, above all, for what happened next, which no one living could have planned. Because Runa, flung wide open with fear, her listening cast across the clearing to find the killers among the trees, brushed as she passed against the caged wolf in the lodge behind her. The one that had climbed 19 years toward the sound of her calling, and in the one moment she needed him, the moment the woman he loved ran white and alone into a ring of silver, Soren's wolf woke. She felt it the way you feel a dam give. Something held down under an old wound, and a young man's grief for 19 years broke its chains and rose. And behind her in the lodge she heard Soren cry out, not in pain, but in a kind of terrible joy. And then she heard, from under the door, the sound she had heard weeping in the dark all these weeks, except now it was not weeping. It was a howl. And it was answered by legs that had not moved in a month, because a wolf has no need of a man's ruined legs. A wolf makes its own, and out through the lodge door came a great dark wolf she had never seen and knew at once, scarred across the muzzle, gray-eyed, whole. 3 wolves in the moonlit clearing then. The queen's men did not stay to finish the count. It was over quickly, and less bloodily than it might have been, because the sovereign wanted them alive to answer. It herded them into the middle of the clearing, where Lysander's own honor guard, roused and appalled, took them at the old wolf's back. And when the assassins had named, in their terror, the hand that sent them, there was no lie left in Dunmoray large enough to cover the Dowager Queen, Ravella. They went back to Wintergarth in the grey dawn, all of them, and it was in the great hall, before the same court that had laughed at a scullion, that the last of it came out, and it came out fast, the way a long-held breath goes. Ravella, brought to answer, did not fall silently, cornered. She reached for the old poison one last time and named Runa a white curse before the lords. And it was then that old Tamsin, who had followed the carts back on her own 2 feet rather than be parted from her girl, walked out into the middle of that cold hall and told the thing she had carried alone for 19 years. "You would know about the Argent line," Tamsin said to the queen, in a voice that climbed to the rafters and did not shake. "You hunted it. 19 winters gone, When the old king's cousin got a daughter with the argent shine in her, you sent your men through the low country to see the last of that line ended. And the one man who stood in their way was the old moonkeeper, who carried the white babe away in the dead of night, and ran into the snow while your men struck him down, and struck the young son at his side, so the boy's wolf never woke again. Her old eyes streamed, but her voice held. The moonkeeper died in the drift with the babe safe under his coat. His son they left behind in the snow. And the one he died for he had already passed to a kitchen woman on the road, who raised her in the sculleries of this very keep, and named her Nothing, so the queen's men would never think to look for a lost princess of the argent line among the pots. The hall had gone so still, the fire was loud. Runa stood in the center of it and felt the whole shape of her life turn over and show its hidden underside. Her name is Runa, Tamsin said, and she is the last daughter of the Argent line. And the man who died in the snow to save her was your own keeper's father, and that, your grace, is why the sovereign bowed. It did not bow to a scullion by accident, but to its own true blood come home, and it kept your wounded keeper close all these years, because he is the son of the one man who ever paid its price, and there it was, laid open at last. The moonkeepers had not fallen in disgrace, but in honor, buried under a lie, because the truth of that night indicted a queen. 19 years on, the child that old keeper had died for had walked all unknowing into the one keep where his wounded son still waited, and had reached into the dark of him and called up the very wolf, silenced that same night. The wound and the healing had been one night all along. It had taken only a white moon to close the circle. Lysander did not fight it. There is no fighting a sovereign that has chosen, and the court had seen it choose, twice, in blood. Ravella was taken to answer for the purge and the poison both. And when the hall turned at last to the small white-clad woman at its center, and to the scarred man who stood on his own 2 feet at her side, with a wolf's new gold in his gray eyes, it was old Bede who spoke the ancient words in a voice gone thick. The sovereign chose, and the choosing was true, but Runa was not looking at Bede, or at the fallen queen, or at the crown that was hers now, for the taking. She had turned to Soren and she said, so that the whole court had to fall silent to catch it, the way he had taught her without ever meaning to. You told me to choose, you knowing exactly what you are. So I will. You are the son of the man who died to save my life before I had lived a day of it. You are the wolf, I heard, weeping in the dark, and would not let go out. You are the one who stepped in front of the silver when I ordered you to stand still. She took his hand in both of hers. I am the sovereign of Dunmoray, by the wolf's own law, and a sovereign may take the consort she chooses, and I choose you. Not the crown offered now only because I have become convenient. You. I have been chosen by accident the whole of my life. Let me, just this once, do the choosing. And the gray sovereign, ancient and gray, and no longer alone, came and lay down at the feet of them both, and lowered its great head to the 2 of them together, and the white wolf's blood and the keeper's son were made one thing in the sight of all, and the long lie was over. They went back to the Whitewood in the spring, and after that as often as they could and never for long enough. The white birches came into their green, and the old lodge lost its held-breath silence and learned the sound of a household. The gray sovereign ran free among the trees at dusk with a great, scarred, dark wolf who had waited 19 years to run, and a small white one who had waited even longer to be seen. Old Tamsin sat in the sun by the door and mended things that needed no mending, and wept only rarely now, and only when she was happy. And on the bright nights when the moon came up over the white wood and turned the whole forest to silver, 3 wolves would sit together on the ridge and lift their heads, and the sound they made was not grief, not any longer. Here is the thing worth carrying away. The world will tell you what you are, loudly and early and often. It will call you wolfless and cursed and nothing at all, and it will say it so long that you begin to keep yourself small to save it the trouble. But the world is not the wolf. And sometimes the oldest, truest part of things is only waiting, under all that noise, to lower its head to who you truly are, in the moment you are finally brave enough to stand in the open light and let it. If this story kept you to the end, do one small thing before you go. Follow the channel so the next tale finds you when the moon is high. And tell me, down below in a word or two, what the world once called you that turned out never to have been true at all.